Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with me, Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. And today our book is Etched on Me by Jenn Crowell. And on Goodreads we have a rating of 3.88, and that's from 339 ratings and 73 reviews. And on Amazon we have only one review which gave it 5 stars, but on Amazon.com there are 20 reviews with an average of 4.6 stars.
The blurb says, it's a girl interrupted meets best kept secret in this riveting, redemptive, coming-of-age story about a young woman who overcomes a troubled adolescence, only to lose custody of her daughter when her mental health history is used against her. On the surface, 16-year-old Leslie Holloway is just another bright new student at Hawthorne Hill, all posh, all-girls prep school north of London. Little do her classmates know that she recently ran away from home, where her father has spent years sexually abusing her. Nor does anyone know that she's secretly cutting herself as a coping mechanism, until the day she goes too far and ends up in the hospital. Leslie spends the next 2 years in and out of psychiatric facilities, where she overcomes her traumatic memories and finds the support of a surrogate family. Eventually completing university and earning her degree, she is a social services success story, until she becomes unexpectedly pregnant in her early 20s. Despite the overwhelming odds she has overcome, the same team that saved her as an adolescent will now question whether Leslie is fit to be a mother, and so she embarks upon her biggest battle yet, the fight for her unborn daughter.
So throughout this book we go through the journey of Leslie and what has happened to her, up to the point where she then ends up pregnant in her early 20s. With this, we thought that we would have a few distinct areas of discussion. So I thought maybe we could talk about her relationship with her parents, so her mum and her dad. And her dad is obviously the parent that abused her for several years. I also then thought we could have a look at self-harm and self-esteem. So as it says with this book, there are some issues where Leslie uses self-harm in order to cope with the reality that she is facing. She also ends up in some residential care units across the country. So we will talk a little bit about what happens when she's in the Nottingham unit, and also what happens to Leslie when she's at Claymore House. We also thought we would talk a bit about her interactions with social services, particularly when she is an adolescent herself, and then the need for further interaction with social services when she is about to bring up her own daughter. And so she then also has this fantastic relationship with a surrogate family, which is with Gloria Krimpsky, which we'll also discuss. But there is so much stuff in this book.
We know there is a lot to talk about in this book, so I think we're going to do a separate podcast about the dealing with the unborn child side of things, and focus mostly on the story of her as a teenager, which is what most of the book is about, and the links to the true story.
Yeah, so this book is actually based on a real life story. A woman called Fran Lyons in the UK fled the country in order to save her unborn child from being taken away from her. So she was told that she was at high risk of harming her child due to her past mental health issues, and the possibility she would develop Munchausen's by proxy, or what is now known as factitious disorder inflicted on another, as a result of her history with borderline personality disorder. And this book, we both agreed on the rating, and we both gave it 5 stars.
Yeah, I really liked this book, and I look forward to reading others by the same author.
Yeah, so this book is actually the second of a 2-book series, so there is another book that chronologically goes before this book, and that book is focused on Gloria, or Miss Krimpsky, and I think we'll probably read that at a later date as well, but we both went, we need to read this other book as a result of reading this book.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was really good. Overall, I really enjoyed it, and it's one of those books I found really difficult to put down. I wanted to read it and get through it and see what was going to happen.
Yeah, for me, I felt that it was maybe a little close to home. Whilst I didn't go through some of the things that Leslie goes through in the book, I have self-harmed. Could this, and I haven't necessarily been involved with social services, but could this be something that I would need to be concerned about later in life as a person who has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder?
Yeah, I think it helped me to understand maybe a little bit more about self-harm for someone who hasn't done it before and what it feels like and sort of some of the extremes of it.
Yeah, so you get to follow Leslie's story and kind of understand a little bit more about the reasons behind why she's harming herself and to what effect that is being used, and also the fact that she also disassociates to be able to cope with the abuse that she suffered from her father. So this particular book deals with self-harm, it deals with sexual abuse from a family member, it also deals with suicide.
And the stigmas related to all of those, because when Leslie is seeking treatment for things like the self-harm, people make massive assumptions about why she did it, what happened. You know, the fact that she enjoys pain, for example, when actually it's not about that, and that's not what she was doing and why she was doing it.
Exactly. So Leslie runs away at 16 from home because her father has been sexually abusing her ever since, in her words, she could fill out a bra. She goes and contacts social services, although she is concerned that because she is 16 that she doesn't necessarily fall into the category that they will be able to help. But she contacts them, she runs away, and she meets this fantastic woman who is a social worker called Francesca, and they start to put the processes in place for them to be able to prosecute Leslie's father.
Yeah, it was very hard to read about the police interview I found to do with that, how detailed they wanted to get about what had happened and what was going on, and the detail about the examination that she had to have as well.
But you would expect to gather all the evidence that they're going to need to prosecute this man, that she would have to unfortunately go through even more trauma, and It is a traumatic experience. Being 16, having to detail everything that her dad did to her in graphic detail.
Yeah.
And also then have to have these physical exams. And for the first time in her life, she turns to Francesca and she goes, "Can I say no?" And Francesca says, "Yes, you can say no, but we need this information so that it can help us with the prosecution."
Well, when it comes to court cases, it is up to the prosecution to prove the case.
Mm.
And so it is, although it seems maybe the wrong way around when you put it this way, but in a way it is up for the victim to provide enough for the prosecution to prove that it happened, rather than the defence to prove that it didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard, and I would warn people reading this part, even if you haven't necessarily faced any abuse yourself, it was extremely difficult because it talks about the fact that he would drag her into the hallway cupboard. They actually say closet at this point, so this book is written by a lady who is an American, so there are some little hiccups in there that might, particularly for a UK reader, might grate on you, such as using closet instead of hallway cupboard, but I think that might just be me, to be fair. But it talks about how she then copes with that when he is basically pushing himself and forcing himself upon her in this closet. And she says that she has found that disassociation worked. She felt that because screaming never did anything, if she felt like she was out of her body, so that she wasn't necessarily feeling it, she could cope with what was happening to her.
And it is a coping mechanism. Later on, they go on to say, when she says that's what's happened to one of her psychologists, they turn around and say, that is a coping mechanism. That's actually your brain being smart, trying to deal with something that it shouldn't have to process. It doesn't know how to process. and it's too big for it to process, especially as she's still, your brain continues to develop into your 25. She's at a stage where her brain is still not fully functioning.
He also tries to bribe her with gifts, doesn't he? So he's like, you've got that really old, beaten up CD player. If you're good, I will buy you for your sweet 16 an iPod.
I quite like her response where she says, all I want is for you to keep your hands off me. I don't want your iPod. I don't want your money and your things. I just want you to stop touching me when you shouldn't.
And as a result of that, he then physically hits her, or
he grabs her around the neck,
doesn't he?
Yeah. And actually she goes, but do you know what? It was worth it because that's what I wanted to say, and that's what he should know. That actually it's not good enough to just go, oh, I'll buy you something nice.
And the other thing that she also has to worry about is the fact that she could end up falling pregnant with her dad's child.
Yeah.
And that must be an extremely horrible feeling to have, and this worry. What happens if she did end up with a baby? It's not the baby's fault that her dad was abusing her, but how would you then bond later with that child?
It's also the medical risk of genetic problems and deformation and stuff, because it's you're not meant to breed with people with your close DNA. In all, and even in the animal kingdom, they find problems with that.
Yeah, and the problem is that all through this, her mother knows what is happening and allows this to happen.
This is where I struggle so hard to understand how you could let. Well, I know let is it's a very accusational word, but the fact that she doesn't stop him, There's
no intervention.
No, she doesn't try to stop him that we know of. I don't understand. She must also be abused or under some control of him, I think. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure why she's letting this go on.
No. And she does get extremely angry when Leslie does manage to get away. So it takes for Leslie to take that step to get away from her abusive father. And then her mum gets angry at her for doing that because she's concerned about the family reputation.
Yeah.
And what happens if this gets out?
And when they go to sentencing and stuff, she says, look what you've done. And Leslie turns around and says, no, what I've done is what he's done. He's getting his comeuppance for what he has done. And the mother never sees it that way. The mother sees it as this is something that Leslie has done. And it's just not that way.
No, exactly.
He's the older man. He is the one that's responsible.
He's the adult in this situation.
Yeah.
She is not mature enough in any way to... Why would she consent in the first instance? Because it's her father. But he's the one that's taking advantage of this whole entire situation.
Yeah. I found that really hard about the sort of stigmas associated with victims, I thought, came back to me about how, people do blame the victims for things. And that's what her own mother is doing to her. And it's almost that idea of actually she is the one that has caused him to be this way.
Which it isn't.
I just don't understand I can't understand any form of logic that would get me to that position.
But I do agree that I do think that there has to have been some kind of coercive control being implemented for her mother to continue to be in such denial, because it just seems to be either denial or I don't understand the anger.
Yeah.
There's something else underlying it that's causing this woman to not fully appreciate that it's not her daughter's fault that this has all happened.
And this is the thing I don't understand. How could you see it as your daughter's fault? How would you not see it as it's the father, it's the man, it's the person doing that? I just, first of all, how you blame them afterwards, but also how you allow that to go on. Why did the mother allow her to be pulled into the cupboard and have these things go on? And Leslie writes how her mum knew what was going on in that cupboard.
Yeah, it's shocking. And I think perhaps we need to do another podcast episode and talk about what may be happening in people's heads as a result of turning a blind eye to abuse, because it's one of the things that I find really difficult to understand. Is there a reason for this? There's got to be something that stops people from doing the right thing. And I'm intrigued as to see if there's any psychology behind why someone would do that.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the bystander theory is something that we cover in school around bullying. We cover it around when I teach about, for example, Nazis and dictatorships and things like that, and how the bystander stands by and sees these things done. But I think this goes even further when it's within a family, when it's
your child. You're meant to be there to protect them.
Yeah, and that's what the maternal instinct usually does. The maternal instinct would usually make the mother want to fight for that child beyond the partnership they have with the father. And yet, that so often seems to not be the case.
It's shocking. I do find that particular set of behaviour shocking.
Yeah, I do think we need to do some more research on it.
We'll have a look. The next kind of bit that I wanted to go into was how Leslie is initially treated by child services when she has the courage and she goes off into the world of child services. So we talked briefly about the fact that they had to go through all of the information gathering and all of that kind of stuff. But the thing that I thought, again, was something that's probably extremely true to life is the fact that there was no foster care family for Leslie to go to after she goes and flees from her home situation.
Yeah, and she gets placed in a bedsit, which is actually for people coming out of prison. And
they say, what was it? The transition, adults in transition, which I think is they're getting out of prison.
Yeah, or I think maybe some people are getting out of hospitals and
rehab of some description or something,
transitioning into their own lives. And that's where she's placed, around adults and around a lot of men, which I thought, being that they know what is going on, you would think that they would find somewhere that was all girls or somewhere where she could feel safe. How could she feel safe with this? I know she goes, is there a lock on the door? And they go, yes. And that does reassure her. But at the same time, one door and a lot of men is not a lot to keep you safe.
No. And it's also the fact that the social worker, Francesca, is also disappointed by the fact that they're having to put Leslie into this hostel of all places. And with this hostel, she then is there for a long time. It's not like it's this, they keep saying it's temporary, but it doesn't turn out to be that temporary.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's a couple of nights while they find her somewhere to go. It is, weeks, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she does feel unsafe there. She describes how she's worried about the men down the corridor, and she waits till everyone is in bed before she goes and has a shower because she just doesn't want anybody near her or around her or to see her when she goes from her room back and things like that. And I can completely understand why she's coming from. And I'm sure with all the cuts and everything that are going on, this is not an only case of this. But it does make me think, we should have places that are specifically for, women and girls who are escaping abuse from men, that they don't have to be around other men while they're trying to gather themselves. It's such a brave thing to do when she left in the first place. I think it was shocking that she was placed in such a horrible place anyway.
I also think that should be the same for male as well as female who have gone through abuse, that they are
placed in a male only. Yeah. It should be female. It should be with females, and males should be with males. And
unless it's the issue is that the boys were being abused by other males.
Yeah.
I think
even just a more secure place. Just somewhere. Almost,
with even someone there. Because she is literally just kind of dumped in this place and just left to get on with it.
Yeah, it's not as even if it's like got a warden or someone or somebody.
Or not that we get to understand in the book. There's no discussion of it in the book.
I'd like to know how often this happens, but unfortunately I think, especially because she is 16 when this happens, where she is concerned about whether the social services will do things for her, the rules do change at 16, and I do think that does affect the fact that she's allowed to be placed in somewhere like this.
It's sad.
It is.
It just is sad. And so, but she's very, I don't know, I felt that she was well looked after, apart from the fact that she's kind of just dumped in this hostel. But the way that Francesca approaches her, she's understanding, she spends time with her, she seems to be there for Leslie. It's a nice portrayal, I found, of social workers who are stretched beyond their capabilities, or it's not their capabilities, but they are stretched above.
Well, yeah, there's only so many hours in the day, and they have a very high caseload, higher than it probably should be, to be able to put the right amount of hours in to make the difference they want to make. And I do think they do show the social services, reps, or whatever you call them, caseworkers, as really kind, really caring, people that really want to help. And I do think something like that must be a calling for people. It's not something I think I could even do. I just think that it must be so emotionally draining.
And the sad thing is that we only really see in the media what happens when things fail and go catastrophically wrong. But these people are very much unsung heroes.
Well, it says in the blurb, this is a success story for social services. She does become, she goes off to university. She goes off to get a job and work in social care herself. And so it is a success story for them until it gets to the point with the unborn child, which we'll do later. But it is, I think that they are portrayed well in this book. And I think that Francesca in particular is really good. Although you also do hear them talk about other caseworkers that maybe aren't
as good as Francesca.
Yeah, like you're lucky to get the good one, which slightly worried me.
But then I guess that's the same probably in most professions.
Yeah,
there are always going to be people that
and
go
people
above
have different
and beyond.
approaches as well. Some people might want someone who isn't as kind and friendly, and someone who's a bit more
motherly.
Yeah, so maybe someone who's less motherly and just gets on with things and a bit more business, So I do think we do need different personalities, and maybe that's why they matched her with her.
Yeah. The next thing that kind of leads on from this is the way that the prosecution actually deals with Leslie's testimony in court. And again, this probably links back to when Becky said that it's the victim has to prove that the thing happened rather than the prosecution having to prove that it didn't happen. The fact that as a result of Leslie's ability to disassociate, she can recall the facts with little emotion, and the prosecution jump on that fact, that as a result of her just telling the facts and explaining what happened without any crying, without any emotion, and this has happened in other situations of child abuse where the child has probably had to repeat the same thing over and over again. You're going to become a bit removed from the situation.
And they say to her, well, you don't seem traumatized. And you just think,
how do you know?
How dare you say this when I'm sitting here and I'm having to go through this? What would you rather I did? Get angry? And they start
have a meltdown of some description.
Yeah, and in that part of the book, they start off by trying to poke her into getting emotional by saying things like, oh, how many sexual partners have you had? Well, what relevance is that? He has abused me. It doesn't matter if I've slept with 50 other men. It doesn't matter.
However, in this case, she hadn't.
No, she hadn't. She hadn't slept with anyone at all.
Doesn't make
and I just think it's such an irrelevant question that they ask. And they also ask other questions that are trying to kind of say that you wanted this. And it's like, it was her father.
And she was a teenager. And she was...
I can't imagine any situation where a child would want that from their parent.
They wouldn't. They wouldn't at all.
So I do think that it then leads on to when she doesn't rise to those things, which the lawyer had warned her about. So she had kind of used that disassociating technique to get through those moments where she really does want to shout and scream and say, how dare you ask me how many partners I've had. But instead, she doesn't rise to it. And then they accuse her of not being emotional enough.
Yeah, I don't know if I could be as cool even if I was disassociating at the time. Yeah. I think they would still be able to break through at points. I mean, she does a fantastic job of just being able to tell them what happened.
Yeah.
It's outrageous. And then the fact that as a result of all of this and everything that she went through, he only gets sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Yeah.
That was sickening.
I thought so. Because the emotional damage that is done through something like that, I think, isn't fully considered in our justice system.
I don't think it's considered in any of the justice systems around the world. I mean, just a side note, I have been watching too much true crime TV. And there was this series about white collar crime. And if they weren't running around and shooting at people and killing people and breaking people's legs and stuff, their sentence for the white collar crime, so that's the stealing off of people and bigamy and the things that cause emotional damage, they got a lot less time in prison.
Yeah.
And they were also then released earlier as well. So we don't seem to take emotional pain as seriously as physical pain. And yes, no one died, but it's still painful.
Mm.
And that's what also gets to me, is the fact that it is still painful.
It's something that she's going to have to live with for the rest of her life.
We see that in the book, how she has to spend years trying to get over this whole entire situation. It's not a case of her getting over it, but it's a case of her then being able to deal with the after effects, because she then is diagnosed with borderline personality disorder.
Yeah. That is lifelong. There is no fix for that, you know.
You can manage it.
Yeah, but it is lifelong. It is also, you know, you see people who come out of rapes and sexual abuse and that have PTSD from what they've gone through, you know. So people come out of war with PTSD. So it does make you think that actually these emotional scars that these people are inflicting could be longer than if someone broke my leg.
Yeah.
You know, if someone in a bar fight hurt me, actually, yes, that might still cause PTSD, but it also could actually heal up and be a lot less stressful in the long run than somebody sexually abusing you, especially for years, and especially someone so close. So I was shocked at 5 years. I don't know what the statutes say about these things and what exactly was incest is on our statute books. I'm not sure. Or whether it was rape or whether it was sexual assault. I'm not sure. But I do think that it just seemed not long enough. Although her mum thinks it's too long. Her mum thinks that it's outrageous and that she's ruined everyone's lives.
I find it extremely hard to empathise with her mum on any level. So after the court case, Leslie goes off to school. She's still staying at the hostel. It's quite some distance away from this new prep school that she's off to. And there she meets Miss, who she is Gloria, and she starts to form a relationship with Gloria. Gloria sees that something in Leslie that I think reminds her of herself, and she offers to give Leslie lifts because they live near each other. So she doesn't have to take public transport. She now is able to get a car ride into school. But during this time at school, she starts to use self-harm as a way to deal with her emotions. She also, really, their relationship is solidified when she cuts off her hair.
Yeah.
And Miss comes in and helps her because she basically turns up one day and her hair's been cut off and she did it herself. And it doesn't look the best. And so Miss helps her by giving her a nice short pixie cut.
Well, I think she's having an identity crisis because she's not at home anymore, which is it's been, I know she left, but was pushed out for the reason that she had to go, really. So she isn't at home. She's in a strange place. Her sexual identity must be completely messed up. She doesn't know what's left, right, and centre because...
What is normal? What is okay? Is she going to be feeling attracted to men because the one man in her life that should have been there to protect her has done the complete opposite.
Yeah, she wonders if actually she is straight, but she's so sort of her sexual experiences have made her so disgusted by men that actually maybe that's pushed her to not feel straight. But then at the same time, she's like, but then maybe I was always not straight, or a little not straight, and how not straight am I? And there's all these questions which teenagers go through anyway, let alone when something like this has kind of happened as well. So you've got her sexual identity, but also her general physical identity of what she looks like, how she acts. She's in a new school. She's got the pressure of that. She's meant to be a grown-up now pretty much because she's left on her own to look after herself and to cook for herself and to, you know, get herself to school. She's given a hell of a lot of responsibility all at once. So I can understand why, you know, cutting off her hair, trying to make herself someone new is an important step in her dealing with what she's doing and going through.
Yeah. For me, with someone with borderline personality disorder, I would say that she's probably lost her only identity. Her identity was that she was the girl in the cupboard being abused by her father. And that has been essentially taken away, or has been stopped. She didn't want it to happen, which is fair enough, but it was the one thing she knew she was. And so how do you then get back a sense of who you are as a result of all of the stuff that's happened before? Now you have to then move on and go, well, I am X, Y, and Z, and I believe these things.
I think especially with her mother and the way her mother's reacting, because her mother isn't supporting her, so she is going to question herself.
There's a lack of emotional support from her mother and her father. So she's been emotionally neglected.
Because I think you see that when Gloria sort of opens up and says, you know, you're not the only one that's been through this. And she sort of says, I didn't go on with my family and he did stuff. And then she said, did you prosecute? And she said, well, it didn't go that far. And she very abruptly says, well, it's not the same thing because he didn't you, you know.
Yeah, and she gets extremely angry. And these kind of things are definitely things that I probably would have done in the past and still do now, is that there is this, how do you respond to others who have been in similar but different situations than you?
Yeah.
And it's not a competition, but you kind of feel because you're opening up emotionally and then someone says to you, oh, well, I've also gone through that. Like they're taking something away from you emotionally.
Yeah, as if like, oh, it's everyday stuff, so it's not as important. Whereas actually to her, like you said, it's the sole part of her identity. It is a really important part of her experiences. Her childhood is basically being defined by
being abused.
This abuse, yeah. And so I can definitely see. But what I like about Gloria, and I have so much...
Gloria is fantastic.
Yeah, I have so much praise for Gloria. But what I like about Gloria is she, after doing that, she sees her and she acknowledges, look, this isn't the same. I wasn't saying it's the same. But I'm here.
Yeah, and she doesn't... And also, it might be another way for her to go and push people away.
Yeah.
So it's a way of, maybe if Miss knows that I had or have been abused, she's no longer going to talk to me and she's going to abandon me like my mother did, like my father did, like everyone in my past has done.
And I'm going to
feel
judged. Yeah. Like she feels, well, if my mother's going to blame me for what happened, then won't everyone else?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think, you know, to be worried that actually other people are going to turn around to you and go, well, why did you ask him to? Why did you want him to do that? When there is I can't see any rhyme or reason why that would ever be the case. But people do seem to say these things to people. And so I can understand her fear of that. Definitely.
And how she wants to keep some kind of barrier between herself and Miss, because she is starting to see her as this motherly figure and someone that she can turn to. But because, as we said, everyone else in her life has done the opposite, you're going to be really worried by this new relationship. You don't know how a normal relationship or what can be considered a normal relationship works. You just don't understand.
Well, the two people that are meant to love her unconditionally beyond anything
betrayed her
completely in maybe different ways, but they both have. So how can she trust anybody else to be there for her when the people that should be there no matter what aren't there for her? And I completely understand. I have so many issues with trust because I felt that my family, didn't support me when I needed it.
Well, you said that you had some issues with certain aspects where it was bringing up some of your own past trauma and how you were, particularly with the people not believing her and certain things.
Yeah, I think especially when you're blamed for something.
And it's not your fault.
And how, growing up, I was told I was the troublemaker in the house. I was the one that started all the arguments, when actually all the arguments were based on the things my mother was doing. So my mother caused all the arguments, but no one, even to this day, will say that. It's always Becky started the arguments.
And I don't think that her parents have taken responsibility for it at all.
Well, no, he pleads not guilty, because otherwise she wouldn't have to have gone through everything she did. So he must have pled not guilty to the accusations. And then her mother turns around and says, you've ruined, as in Leslie, you've ruined our lives. You've caused all these problems.
Yeah, it's tough. It's very difficult. But she starts using, or she finds out that self-harm is actually providing her with some sense of relief from her emotions. So she has something called an X-Acto knife. I'm assuming it's some kind of craft knife. I haven't looked it up, but I'm assuming it's some kind of craft knife. And whilst she is feeling all these emotions that she doesn't necessarily understand or knows how to deal with, she takes the knife and she starts to stab it into her wrist.
Yeah,
and she starts to draw blood.
She says she just pops it at the skin. So just literally nicking it to just see these tiny bits of blood.
And that progresses because she starts to find out that actually physical pain is easier to deal with than emotional pain.
Yeah.
So her self-harm increases. And unfortunately, it increases to the point where, as a result of her disassociating, so she's needing to harm herself at school. And unfortunately, I think self-harm at school has increased, I think, from what I
at least
understood.
Reporting of it has, definitely, and the understanding of it. I know back when I was at school, I don't think people reported or understood or shared their experiences.
Well, I
think there's
so
more
ashamed
of that now.
Of my own self-harm.
Yeah, whereas
and I
now
did it in places that no one could see it.
Yeah, and there is an element of children doing it sometimes because they hear other people are doing it. And so it isn't, I don't think it's the same as it was back then. So there is a level of that. But there is an increase in self-harm. And it's not something I ever did, but I can see how trying to deal with physical pain, especially as if you are feeling like you're not coping,
it's just too much.
Causing some pain to then cope with that pain kind of is reassuring yourself maybe that you can cope because you can cope with this. And I think that you can understand where she's sort of coming from, and it just really shows how much help she needs as well. I felt the bit where she is, because she's disassociating when she's self-harming, there's one point where she suddenly feels a gush and realizes she's gone too far because she was so disassociated. She wasn't really watching what she was doing. And that's when she gets rushed to hospital and Miss is there, and I assume they think that she has done that on purpose. She's actually tried to kill herself when actually she had no association with that. She was
not at this point.
No, she was just not paying attention to what she was doing and just trying to cause those medium amounts of pain that she was going through.
And I think that the next part is, I don't know, I've never been admitted to hospital for my self-harm. We have given a trigger warning at the beginning of this podcast, but for me, it was more about having blunt knives and the fact that I needed to put a lot of pressure through that knife to draw blood. That's what it was for me. It was that physical pressure being placed. So,
well, I think this shows how diverse the reasons for self-harm are. It isn't necessarily about the release afterwards. It's not necessarily about, like you said, the pressure and the
ability
achievement.
to feel something
Yeah.
that wasn't emotional pain, because that was difficult to cope with. The physical pain, because let's face it, if you've ever cut yourself with a blunt knife and you've had to put lots of pressure on it, it does hurt. It's not, I wanted that pain, the stinging pain. Whereas a clean slice, I don't know about you, I've chopped my finger quite significantly as a result of cutting up something that, and I sharpened the knife beforehand, and that clean cut didn't hurt as much.
These were cooking injuries.
Yeah, I'm pretty accident prone, but that clean cut didn't hurt as much as when I do take the knife and put a lot of pressure through it to get the cuts.
Yeah.
And although they're really shallow, it's like having multiple paper cuts, and you know how much those sting.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the sensation that I would go for. Whereas for Leslie, it was more the fact that she misjudged how much she was doing when she was disassociating. And that just goes to show how powerful disassociation is, because she cuts an artery and there's blood spurting everywhere and she doesn't realise it.
And actually, when she describes it, she doesn't talk about the pain. She talks about the gush, and she talks about the seeing the blood
and the panic
and the almost
with it.
fainting because of what she sees. She doesn't actually say this hurt. It's only when the paramedics then want to put in like a cannula to put a drip in, and she then says, is this going to hurt? And this is where I found some of the interactions between her and the paramedics, and then her with the medics at the hospital, very difficult and uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that you're never going to find this in hospitals or with certain people out there that have an opinion that if you have self-harmed, that you brought this all on yourself and you're doing it for attention and you must enjoy the pain. That is not necessarily the case. You're going to have people that think this way.
Yeah.
But it's not the case. And I think the paramedic says something about she did it herself and is looking down on her and judging her for that. And then the medic at the hospital, the doctor, almost or starts to repair the damage that she has caused on her arm without any anaesthetic.
Yeah, he's going to start stitching and there's no anaesthetic.
Yeah.
And he says something similar to,
you must be all right with the pain because look at the state of your arm. Excuse me?
Yeah. And actually, she never intended that.
Yeah, and thank goodness for Gloria, who comes in and goes, excuse me, you will give her pain relief. And
it's the judgmental part of it that I think associates with what you said, that you felt such shame around it. Because
I didn't want to admit it.
No.
And it took me a long time to admit it.
First of all, it is seen as a weakness that you are succumbing to this, when actually it is a coping mechanism for something bigger and more emotionally draining. And as a teacher, one of the first things we're taught about when it comes to finding someone with self-harm is to be non-judgmental. And it's actually about not saying to them, you shouldn't do this and stop doing that. It's about actually teaching them how to keep it clean, teaching them the appropriate ways, explaining them, not to go too deep and things like that. And
also that there are other ways to deal with their pain.
Yeah, while also giving them counselling and help and support. But I do still find, teachers that go, well, they're only doing it for attention and things like that. And I've had students come up to me and one of them was saying, I've cut myself and I've had to go, okay, well, let me have a look at it. Let's have a look. And this was literally me then holding her arms together while we, went to patch her up and then get her to the hospital for stitches because that's what she needed. And she'd done that from, taking the blade out of a sharpener. And people
get industrious. If you want to hurt yourself, you do get quite industrious about it.
Yeah.
But, people, I think, are too quick to judge.
But people immediately went, she's doing it for attention. And I'm like, well, I don't know her story. I don't know what's going on. It's not my job in the school to have found out about that. But what I do know is that right this moment, she needs medical care. She needs help and support for that.
Yeah, she also needs psychological care to help her because it's not easy stopping self-harm. I think Leslie describes it as that she starts to feel addicted to it because it feels like such a relief. It's so much pressure is lifted from you when you self-harm. When you're feeling so it's difficult to explain. When you've got so many emotions going on all at once, you don't have the words to describe it. It's kind of like when you see a toddler who has a tantrum because they're not at that verbal stage.
Yeah.
We're talking about this probably because we've spent some time this afternoon with a toddler who, she's one, she can say a few things, but she's starting to get to the point where she understands you, but she can't verbalise what it is that she wants. And when you don't get it right, she has kind of a tantrum. But it's
frustration.
Yeah, it's
an
pure
overload.
Frustration of not being able to identify what the hell is going on inside.
And I do think that emotionally we aren't intelligent enough necessarily to explain.
I don't think we're
and that's
taught
for someone
it properly.
Yeah, I think for somebody like myself who doesn't have something like borderline personality disorder or any of these things, it's hard for me to articulate what I'm feeling. For someone with a borderline personality disorder, it's even harder because you don't identify all their feelings. You don't necessarily feel
I spent
all the
quite
feelings.
a long time trying to just sit there and go, what is it I am feeling right now? And so it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? When you go, as a 30-year-old adult, I'm having to sit there going, right, am I feeling sad? Am I feeling angry? Am I feeling happy? Am I feeling scared? Because you do kind of sit there and go, well, that's just crazy talk. How can you not understand those feelings? It's because you've basically been told your entire life that what you're feeling is wrong and not to trust it.
Or you've been taught only certain feelings by the people
anger is fine.
By your parents that have taught you feelings yourself.
Yeah.
You know, I was taught anger was bad and wrong. So I've suppressed so much anger over the years that now I have to I feel a little bit of something and I usually go, is this anger? Well, let's just check. I'm a bit annoyed and I'm
Becky's anger person.
You kind of get the scale for me and I go, is this anger I'm feeling? Is this right to be angry at?
And I'm going, I'm livid. I'm come and sort them out. This is just rude. And yeah, you're just like, am I right to be angry about this? I'm about to rip someone's head off.
Because I wasn't allowed anger. I wasn't, none of my feelings of anger were ever supported.
Was your brother's feelings of anger allowed in your household?
I
just
don't
out of
think
interest. Or was it just all anger?
If they were all any of those aggressive or angry feelings directed at my mother were not allowed.
I guess that's kind of fair enough.
Because she would, if any of us criticised her in any shape or form, we were victimising or bullying her or being unjust, and it wasn't right, and it was, and to be told that every time you get angry, you're bullying somebody. From a girl who grew up being bullied by people at school anyway,
You'd probably be terrified. You'd be like, oh, I can't show any anger because I'm doing exactly what I'm getting at school and I feel awful because of that. And yeah, of course you're going to suppress your anger.
Yeah. And so I think my siblings did have a level of that, but at the same time, they got angry at me,
that was fine.
That was okay.
But you couldn't show... Could you show anger back at them? Was that okay?
Well, not really, because every time I did, for example, to my sister, I'd be told, well, you're the older sister. You should be able to sort her, look after it and sort it out. So I suppose being that I was meant to be the responsible one, I was told
still doesn't mean
no.
that you shouldn't have anger associated with your sister. Just saying.
True. Yeah, I know.
But I don't think we do children a proper service with how we deal with emotions and how we learn.
No, I mean, I watched
about emotions.
A documentary on the BBC about, and it was looking at gender neutrality in schools.
I saw that one, yeah.
It was really good. I'm not even sure it's still on iPlayer, but if you ever do get to see it, it is amazing.
I will try and find it and put it in the show notes if I can.
And what I found really surprising was that when they were talking about, they did pre-testing on these children, and they were in primary school. I think they were like year 6, so they must have been, or they were 6, either 6 or 8. They were small children, and they did say to them, like, what emotions, what can you identify them? And the girls found it very much easier to identify different emotions.
That's because of the way we socialise them.
Yeah. And that's what the point they were making. Whereas boys, the only real emotion they knew how to identify was anger. And that to me is really worrying, that we're not teaching children about variations in anger. And
we're variations in just general emotion.
Yeah. I had a kid at school who's had a really, really tough upbringing and is now no longer living with parents, is living with an aunt. And they found it really hard because at times they're angry at their parents. But at the same time, but at the same time, you're told that you should love your parents. So you should love them. So how can you love them, hate them, be angry at them all at the same time?
It's confusion, isn't it? And also that emotions aren't necessarily as simple as we make it out to be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling at the moment with some anxiety and some depressive feelings. And so there are days where, like today, I've had a good day. And I've had a really nice day.
Because we went to Hobbycraft.
Yeah. And other craft shops are available. I have had fun and I've had laughs and I've had a great day. But in the quiet moments, I still felt sad. So even though I've had a good day, I can still feel sad. So how can you be happy and sad when we're told that those are opposites? And we're taught that as children. Those are opposites. But are they?
No. I don't know if they're necessarily opposite. I think you can feel them both at the same time. And I think that's probably where our teaching is limited to the way that we describe things.
Yeah.
And you would have seen Inside Out, which is the Disney Pixar.
Amazing.
Which is fantastic. And I say to my husband, as I'm trying to explain to him what borderline personality disorder is, I'm like, at the end of the movie, if you haven't seen it, you should watch it, but this is a spoiler alert. At the end of the movie, she goes through a console upgrade where she is able to feel multiple emotions at the same time. And I say to my husband, I didn't get that upgrade. I got the upgrade way before time with the swear words, because I think that's one of the things that it shows us, that you get some good funky words in there with your upgrade. I got that before then, but I didn't get that ability to be able to feel, even be able to identify whether it was anger or sadness or joy or whatever it is.
From the movie, the best thing I found from that movie was that it accepts that you have to have all these emotions. Every single emotion is valid. And that you are allowed to feel them.
Yeah.
It's just, if yes, you're allowed to feel anger, you're not allowed to punch people and you're not allowed to hurt people. I know. But you are allowed to have anger.
Yeah.
And you are allowed to have joy, and you are allowed to have worry.
It's the way you deal with those and respond to those.
And how frequent those, you don't want, basically you want like a level playing field of most of them. You don't want one of them taking over. Whereas like that's one of the things that she has. Joy is pretty much wants to be everything and is the boss, because actually as a child, that's what it should probably be. But unfortunately, a lot of childhoods aren't. And I think coming back to what we were talking about with Leslie, I think Leslie hasn't got the emotional maturity to understand her emotions, to deal with it any other way than the self-harming.
We get stuck.
Because she is so, stuck in what she's doing and feeling. And
Leslie is really stuck at the point where her father started to physically abuse her.
Yeah.
And so that could be an 11, 12, 13-year-old teenage child. And let's be honest, we all know how difficult it was to understand emotions back then. But as you start to get older, it's something that you kind of are told that you should know. And no one ever really goes back over it for you, particularly for people that are like, what? What's that? So, and also how to respond to certain emotions. So one of the things that I learned through DBT, or dialectical behaviour therapy, was that you are not your emotion, if that makes sense.
And Leslie gets that. And I can see how, because I've seen the work you've done with it over the years. And because
Becky knew me before I was officially diagnosed. And obviously she knows me now, I hope.
And in between.
Yeah.
And I see the massive leaps that you have made. There's still a way to go.
You were probably, one of the only people that saw behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Because I would hide quite a lot of things.
Yeah. And I'd have Lawrence there and support him, because he was struggling with supporting you and knowing what to do. And often you wouldn't listen to Lawrence.
No.
So who
would listen to your other half? I mean, come off it.
He would call me and say, like, can you talk her down, basically?
Because I would be in full eruption mode.
Yeah, and he was worried about you. And so, whether he probably should have called maybe an ambulance at some times, but
we live and learn.
But at the same time, you know, I do think that he, you know, I've seen the difference and I've seen the improvements DBT has helped for you. And the same path, you know, I'm not someone who suffers with that. However, I've had counselling now for 2 years. Yeah. And I think my emotional maturity has improved so much in those 2 years.
It's just crazy that we are told that we have to learn quadratic equations at school, which I've never, ever used since school. However, emotions that I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, I never got that information at home, which is where they would expect it to come from. And I never got that input at school either.
No, I think the only emotions...
something that I didn't really care about, quadratic equations, and something that I do care about that impacts my daily life day to day was never even touched upon.
I think that
it might be better now. I'm not saying
that. I'm a teacher now, and I teach, you know, the PSHE or whatever it is called at different times about social, emotional health.
But it's not tested on, so no one really takes it seriously.
No, but then even when they do, like I teach year 7 sometimes, and we did a whole session on grief, and I thought that was really important.
How interesting.
And we were talking about different ways in which people cope with it, and that however it can be from anything from losing your fish to, you know, losing your parents, you know, or a sibling. It could be anything, and that actually grief is still valid no matter what end of the spectrum you're at.
Yeah. And it takes time.
Yeah, and we talk about different ways of approaching grief. We even talk about comedy in grief and things like that. And I teach it as a very kind of open and discussion. But I know that that's probably the only lesson I've taught about an emotion that covers, maybe it would be an array of emotions, but covering something that would trigger emotions. There's nothing I ever teach about, you know, for example, when we do sex ed, we never talk about, you know, the emotions around it. We talk about
mechanics.
Putting on condoms.
Yes,
which they gave
your carrot.
Oh, they gave me a carrot to teach how to put condoms on.
Was it a big carrot?
It was a large carrot, and it was one of those things where you look at the class and you just go, okay, let's all laugh at this, because
I think this is funny too.
I have to laugh at this, otherwise I'm going to walk out the room. And you're not allowed to leave 30 children.
This funny.
So I do think that there should be more teaching, and I don't know in primary school if they do more, because actually I think it should start earlier, some of it. But when they get to teenagers, you would think that we would teach them about coping with their emotions, because they get a whole array of hormones that kick their emotions off as well.
Yeah. I was an angry Actually, I was just angry, generally. I was quite angry. But I would hide that anger. So I wouldn't necessarily... I would put on this happy face and everyone would be like, oh yeah, she's so happy. Behind the scenes, I was, not that happy person. I mean, I have a book now that I have been reading that lists every description of different emotions that you can think imaginable, which
and
is
more,
fantastic.
Because some of them we don't even know.
Collywobble. We were like, what on earth is collywobble? And I read that and I was like, well, it's like this. So it's like you having butterflies in your stomach. But that's a good kind of thing, because that's exciting, where collywobbles is the opposite. It's you're feeling the fluttering in your tummy, but you're also feeling
got to
fear.
do something bad.
Yeah. Like public speaking or something.
Or like admitting you've done something wrong.
Yeah. And like these things, you're like, I didn't even know there was a word for that.
No, it's so true. I mean, and I think, you know, Leslie is struggling so much with what's going on, and I've seen it. I've dealt with various students who have been self-harming, and
it's tough.
And still, I don't tell them to stop, because that's not what you do. Encouraging them to try and stop where they can, but admitting that actually there'll be good days, there'll be bad days, there'll be relapses after months, there'll be
after years.
There'll be times when actually you do it once, but you never do it again for years and years. You just don't know what's going to be thrown at you. And it is a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
It isn't the action that's going to cry for help, because actually most people hide it. Most people don't want it seen. And when they do want it seen, when it is crying out for help, it's because actually think of, you know, how extreme the emotion it must be that you're feeling.
That you hurt yourself.
Yeah.
That you take that knife, whatever it is that you do, you physically hurt yourself. Because let's face it, most of us don't like being in pain, but you're doing it on purpose.
Yeah. So
Paper cuts are awful.
The way that she feels during, you know, the time when that paramedic is putting her down and then the medic
doctor,
is putting her down.
Yeah.
I think the only saving grace is Gloria, who turns around and has a go at them and actually picks them up on it, because she's not in a position where she can pick them up on it.
No.
You know,
she's a teenager. She's still only 16 at this point.
She's emotionally raw because she's just relived and had to deal with, you know, the examinations and the inquest and all, you know, all these things into the investigation into what's gone on. All of these things are happening. I just feel so... I feel for her so much in those moments that actually you want to be Gloria, you want to be protecting her, that you know,
that's
mother lion.
Needs, isn't it? That's what she needs. You need someone there to go, you know what? No, you are doing the wrong thing. Don't judge her because she's hurt herself. Think about how much pain she is in as a person.
But do you know what it makes me think in that moment? That when Gloria is standing up for her and saying these things, that should be her mother.
Of course it should have been her mother.
And that's another reason.
That should have been her parents.
I think that's another reason why she pushes Gloria away at times, because she doesn't see that that's what her mother should be doing.
She doesn't see that anyone should be doing that for her, because she's got such eroded self-esteem. She doesn't feel like someone like Gloria should be in her life. Again, pushing her away.
It makes me think, how many people are walking around feeling so worthless? Because I know I have felt that for a long time and my counselling is helping me, but you know, I walked around like that for 30 years and no one realised.
No.
And
it's not something that you regularly talk about. I mean, how often would you go, oh, today I'm feeling a bit worthless?
Especially as you don't feel, because you feel worthless, you don't feel you deserve to tell people and to have that acknowledged and to have it, you know, dealt with. So it takes a long time for that sort of thing to come out. And
also linked with her feeling worthless is also her lack of self-identity. How can you feel like you are worth something when you have no idea why it is you are alive?
Yeah. She also has to admit that her parents are wrong.
Yeah, and she has to radically accept. So this is a skill that you're taught within dialectical behaviour therapy, is that at times there are things that you just cannot change. And in this case, she cannot change her relationship with her mother. Her mother's always going to support her father. She is not going to get the emotional needs met from her parents. She needs to radically accept that this is the situation she's in. Because if she doesn't, it's going to cause her more harm, because she's going to keep ruminating about it. She's going to keep going, well, I'm not deserving of any of this because my mother didn't do it. Not the fact that there is something wrong with her mother for her to be supporting her father still.
And I think, unfortunately, the situation she's in, even though she has Gloria fighting for her, there are more people, even with Francesca supporting her, there are more people like her mother, like the paramedic, like the medic, and we're later on going to see other examples, you know, there are more people turning around and saying to her, what you're doing is wrong, what you believe is wrong, and you're the one that's the problem.
And also, radical acceptance is difficult. It's not like one morning you can get up and go, oh, it's fine, I radically accept this. You have to constantly turn your mind back to the fact that this is the way it is. Because there are going to be times when, for example, you sit up here and we've discussed your mum and your mum's relationship with you.
Yeah.
And there are times when you go, she's just not going to fully understand or comprehend the emotional suffering that you went through as a child.
Yeah.
And that's something that you've had to radically accept. No matter how much you explain it to her, she's just never going to get it.
No.
But at times I bet you go, oh, I wish she really would.
Yeah, of course.
And then you go, no, she's not going to get it. And this is also another thing with radical acceptance, just how difficult that particular thing is to do.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're necessarily ever taught that either.
No.
As people, generally.
Well, I suppose if you have the happy childhood, then
I guess you get to understand that.
And you don't necessarily need to know that. It is...
Maybe, though, because surely as an adult you would need to understand that there are going to be situations that are just, you can't change.
Well, I think, we all have to accept that. Teenagers find that particularly difficult, though, because the hormones that are going through and the brain development...
difficult.
Well, the brain development they're going through at that time, they so believe they're the centre of everything, that actually to be able to radically accept anything almost goes against what their brain is telling them to believe.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I mean,
it's going to find it hard.
There's even times now when I go, right, you have multiple sclerosis. And I've moved from Australia back to the UK where I spent some time in one NHS trust, and they made me have another MRI and they went, yes, you have MS. But there was still that hope inside of me that they were going to turn around and go, no, it's not MS. And then I moved again to a different NHS trust and they made me go through everything else again. So I had to go back through the MRI and all of the tests. And they're like, there's me again hoping that it's not the case, that it's not MS. And they go, oh yes, your results are consistent with MS. And you're like, I know that. Why do I keep going, oh, well, maybe it's not? Yeah. Do you know, there's this weird hope.
I think there's also partly because they got it wrong for so long before they said it was MS. They kept saying it was all these other things.
Migraines.
Yeah. But I completely get that. I mean, I have fibromyalgia and
it's difficult, isn't it?
It is hard to accept that you're going to have this forever. It's one of those things you're just going to have to cope with. You didn't ask for it. No one would. And you didn't do anything to get it. It's just happened. And actually, it might be linked to my childhood trauma, which, you know,
that's probably another episode we need to think about doing, is something about childhood trauma and emotional neglect and later health issues.
Yeah. I think it's just, you know, having to accept all that is so hard. And I do think about Leslie in the future and whether, you know, she is a success story. She goes through a lot, but she does
come out at the end.
And I think partly because she has Gloria rooting for her, and Gloria's a teacher and she, you know, wants her to be educated. She wants her to get out. And education, I think, is one of the biggest keys to getting out of any situation is education. So, you know I'm a teacher, so I'm obviously going to say that. But I also think, you know, I got out of my situation through education.
I did too.
Yeah, and I always say to the kids,
we'd still be on a counsellor estate.
We would. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
if that's
not
what
at
you
all.
want. But, you know, if you want to be earning a living, you want to be working, you know, at a job that challenges you and things like that.
And you enjoy.
And that you enjoy. You know, it is about, you know, going for as much as you can. You know, you deserve to get as educated as you want to be. But that aspiration is so important. And what is Leslie gonna, at first I think she neglects her education, partly because she can't cope with anything. So of course she can't cope with reading a book of any kind, even though she's intelligent, because her brain is trying to deal with everything. But also because, you know, what aspiration has she got? Her life is defined by where she was and what was going on.
Yeah, she can't see the future at this point.
No.
But for Leslie, as a result of this unfortunate incident where she has self-harm to a point where they have to stitch up her arm, they decide that perhaps she needs additional support, and they send her off to I don't know how they explain it in the book, but they send her off to a centre in Nottingham. It's called the Phoenix Centre, and it's a place for people that are dealing with mental health issues and self-harm, and they stipulate that there are two main rules for being at this particular unit. One of those is that they don't self-harm ever again. And if because they're going to be teaching them coping skills and different ways to deal with this build-up of emotion. And the second is that they do not enter into a romantic relationship with another patient at the centre. And at this point, Leslie's like, that's okay, the self-harm's going to be tricky, but in terms of a relationship, why on earth would I ever want a relationship with anyone ever again after what's happened to me? So she's like, fine, I can get on with this.
At this point, this is where the person who's actually explaining it to her goes, oh, there's people with poor boundaries in here, and that's why we have this rule. And actually, she says later on, when she thinks back to this moment, she does think, why is that the only way that two people could find themselves and actually fall for each other in such a situation was only because they were mad or whatever, rather than actually, it might not have been poor boundaries. It might have just been actually they were forming a good relationship.
Yeah, I also think that they're probably concerned about this codependency on each other. That we've read quite a few books recently, and the books that are aimed at teenagers seem to have this very strange viewpoint that love will fix your mental health issue, which is not the case. It makes it more complicated.
It's the happily ever after.
Yeah. And I think that's what they're trying to state, is that relationships at the best of times are complicated. So if you enter into a relationship with someone who is dealing with their own mental health issues and then you've put yours on top, it's just going to complicate things.
Yeah.
And you need to focus, you need to be selfish, and you need to focus on your needs first before you think about having a relationship and establishing a relationship with anyone else.
But saying that, her relationship with, I think it's Claire at that point,
Claire.
who actually, they seem very sweet with each other.
They are very, very cute together.
They, wait for each other to be ready for anything. They don't push each other into anything.
Particularly because of what Leslie has gone through in the past.
Yeah, and even though Leslie doesn't, at first, she doesn't say what's happened. She just says, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And Claire starts to pick up even when she starts stiffening to sort of like, because she starts disassociating.
But that's also how much in tune Claire is with her and how concerned she is with Leslie's well-being, is that she notices like the smallest changes.
And it made me very sad when they're caught and then therefore they're both kicked out. And partly that's because Claire's parents become very overprotective.
I think they were overprotective before.
Yeah.
They sent her away because, is she dealing with anorexia or something?
I think it is something like that.
I think it's something to do with food.
But they haven't accepted, if they knew at all, that she
was gay
or possibly has some kind of tendencies that way. And so because of that, they're
deeply religious as well, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they have taught her that actually being gay goes against God and things. So
they gave her an exorcism before she goes into the place in Nottingham. Yeah.
And so they turn around and say they're going to press charges.
Yeah,
against
someone who
Leslie.
has been abused is now being told that she is the abuser. Imagine how messed up you're going to feel because of that.
But then I do suppose there is cases where the abused do become abusers.
Yeah, there are.
So as a protective parent, they might be saying, well, maybe she has been because she is the younger of the two.
Yeah.
But it is, from Leslie's point of view, there is no way in hell that she would ever have done that, because she doesn't. It took her so much to actually
open up to Claire in the first place.
Yeah, and to allow this relationship to blossom, that actually she's then told it's wrong.
Mm.
And so she's now been told both the relationship she's had, one non-consensual with her father and this one with Claire,
this consensual one
is wrong. And that one, that she was the victim and now she's the abuser. And I can just to think about why she then goes into a self-destruct mode.
Well, it makes her feel even more worthless, which is, again, I would completely understand in that situation.
That's also
how you would
fear.
Go,
maybe a fear that you would become your father because someone's actually told you that, know, that actually, how do you then know what you thought was a
consensual
good relationship with Claire?
Yeah.
You're now being told was wrong. So how do you then identify when you're not being the abuser as you're being, told you are?
Yeah, it just screws everything up, doesn't it, really?
Completely. And I really felt for her at that point. And she then sort of spirals into self-destruct mode, doesn't she?
She does. And unfortunately, at this point, she attempts to take her own life with aspirin as she is travelling back to London. So Gloria has said, Leslie, don't worry about it. We'll sort something out. Come back and stay with me. And so she's travelling back to London, but she doesn't make it to London. She ends up in the disabled toilets at the train station, having taken all these pills, and then wakes up 3 days later from a coma in hospital.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking because as she wakes up, Miss isn't there, but Miss is rushed to her, which you go, Gloria really cares for Leslie.
Well, because her husband is there.
Yeah.
And he says, she's given up school while she's been here. She's been at your bedside. She is here. She is sportive. I told her to go and get food because she's been sitting here for 2 days next to you. And I felt she needed it. And it's just the way it is. The moment you wake up is the one moment they're not in the room.
Here.
Of course. So she, and he actually, which I think is really good, he doesn't know her. He's only
know her through Gloria at this point, wouldn't he?
Yeah. And he just accepts that they're helping this girl, that Gloria feels
and that
for
he's
her.
there.
And he's
with
there.
them. Yeah, I think that's amazing.
And he's sitting there and he's supporting this girl that he doesn't know and has no reason apart from Gloria. And actually, you would think maybe that knowing Gloria's past, he'd be saying to her, maybe, you
need to step away from this. It's
but
not helping you.
instead, he is like, no, we need to support this girl. And I think that both of them are amazing people for what they do for her.
Yeah, and they talk about, in the first instance, because they're talking about Leslie coming to stay with them for a while whilst they get her sorted out again, Gloria is like, look, I would take you home in a heartbeat if I knew that you would be safe. But I think that as soon as you get to my house, there's nothing stopping you from going to the medicine cabinet and taking a load of pills again. And Leslie's like, please don't send me away. And you can understand, because it would feel like she's being abandoned again. But in this situation, she needs, again, additional support to help her.
Yeah, because she says to Gloria, like, you said I'd always be welcome at your house. And Gloria says, you are. That's not the point here. And separates out the fact that I have to keep you safe.
Yeah.
And the safety trumps you coming to my house. And if you could promise that you wouldn't go in my medicine cabinet or search the house for something, of course you would. Yeah. But I need to keep you safe. And that's when she says it. Leslie starts to realise, okay, I get that. And I admit
she's angry about it at first.
She is, but then she admits that, you're right. Yeah. I would.
I don't know if I was in that situation, whether that rationality would come through for me. I would probably still be quite annoyed by the situation and feel abandoned by Leslie and Jasha.
But I still think she does feel bad, and she does feel abandoned, and she, she doesn't feel that realisation all the time. I bet she still thinks about it and stuff, wants to go back to her. Because actually, when Gloria talks about her son, she always feels this sort of almost jealousy.
Again, which is understandable, because in some ways he's had a life that Leslie never has had in the past, but also the fact that there is this...
He got the mother she never had.
Yeah, and he's got this relationship, and he is also taking some of Gloria's attention away from Leslie.
Yeah, but I do think that part of the reason that when she first goes into that second centre, which is the Claymore Lodge, she actually proper plays up to them and tries to do everything she physically can to get kicked out, because she's trying to prove that someone is not going to abandon her. Because I still think that shows that she still feels abandoned by Gloria in that.
Of course she does. I would be.
Even though they've said, and logically she might be able to realise, yes, I know this is for my safety, but emotionally that's completely different.
So if we were talking in DBT terms, she wouldn't be able to use her wise mind, which is the part that brings together the logical and the emotional side. So she would go, yes, I'm angry at the situation, but it's the best for me at this time. She is more in emotion mind, where she is kicking off. And as you say, she is trying to get someone to prove that no matter how bad she is, they're not going to leave her. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest fears of people with borderline personality disorder, that you are going to be abandoned. I mean, I had a mini breakdown the other day because I sent you a message and you didn't get back to me for 20 minutes. And it was a message about the podcast. And in my heart, I knew.
I was just putting a bit of flat pack together, and I was just a bit preoccupied.
So in my logical mind, I'm like, she's busy. In my emotional mind, I'm like, oh my goodness, I've gone and upset her somehow. She's angry at me. She's not talking to me. There's something wrong. And then there's me sat there going, right, come on, wise mind. She's busy. Just give her some time. But I was too busy stuck in emotion mind to be able to kick myself back out, because I think I sent you a message going, are you all right? I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. And you were like, I was building my kitchen thing. And you were like, what's going on? And there's me going,
sorry, I was
freaking out.
I was screwing stuff together, trying to follow instructions I don't understand.
And fight with the bunny rabbit, who decided that the instructions and the bits of wood you were trying to put together were the best place to sit.
Yeah. So he went in the cage very quickly after that. But yeah, so it is that being stuck and not being able to separate those two things out. And of course, we are driven by our emotions. So you would ultimately go to emotional side. Mm. So she plays up like crazy, tries to get kicked out, to the point where Gloria even says to her, look, here's the bottom line. You don't have to do any of this.
But it would be better for you if you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All these things are your choice. You can choose to not want to live. You can choose to not want to be here and not do A-levels and not do anything and not soul search, or you can choose to get better. And even though that might change day to day, and even though that...
Of course it changes day to day, yeah.
Even if
given
you choose one day, yes, I'm going to be here, and the next day it changes, she is kind of accepting that actually it isn't about everyone else around you, it's about you making the choice.
Yeah. And she goes through, while she's at Claymore Lodge, she goes through dialectical behaviour therapy. And I am going to probably do an episode all about dialectical behaviour therapy. I have been there myself. I've been through it. It's a year-long programme. It's probably the thing that saved my life. If I hadn't gone through dialectical behaviour therapy, I don't think I would be sat here talking to you right now.
Well, she says the start of it, she says her main aim is just to stay alive and show up.
And that's pretty much what it is at the beginning. It's kind of, I need to figure out who I am. I need to stop the self-harm, and I need to be able to interact with the world better and interact with my emotions better. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's not a quick fix. I mean, it's a year-long program where you have a 2.5-hour group session where you are discussing skills and talking to other people. And then you have an hour on top of that with your own psychologist. So it's a commitment of 3.5 hours a week.
Yeah.
Plus you then have, which you read in the book, you have access to what we would call when I did it was the dialectical behaviour therapy phone. But if I got into a state because something had set me off and triggered me, I would be able to ring this phone and they would be able to coach me with the skills that I had learned from the sessions.
Yeah.
And so it was really kind of that support, because it's all well and good you sitting in a classroom and you talking to your psychologist. That's fantastic. But when you get into that point where you're having that meltdown or that explosion of the fact that I've got so much emotions, I want to hurt myself right now, they can just talk you through what you need to do. It's just having that person there to reassure you. And I think this is the first time, I think we read in the book that she rings Dr. P and she's like, I'm going to cut myself, I'm going to hurt myself. And Dr. P just goes, well, do it then. And she's like, what? Well, if that's what's going to help you, do it, but do it in a way that's sensible. But also, what about other things you can do? There's other things that you can do to try and combat that. And
she even does how long do you think you can not self-harm for? Yeah. And she goes 5 minutes. So think.
Do it that.
In 5 minutes, if you cannot self-harm 5 minutes, then that's great. If in 5 minutes you then self-harm, well, you waited 5 minutes.
It's better than nothing.
Yeah. Exactly. And so she does that. And then she plays guitar and then she does this. Yeah. And she just keeps trying to distract herself.
Exactly. And that's what it's called. It's the distraction. It's also self-soothing and being able to deal with it. She also talks about drawing red lines on her arms so that she sees the redness, but she doesn't then actually harm it. I mean,
having
used
the
a band.
The pink, yeah.
If you've not ever done that, get a hairband or an elastic band and just sit there and repeatedly ping it against your wrist. It hurts after a while. You get pretty sore and pretty red around your wrist. If that stops the urge to self-harm, then fantastic. I mean, I've had to use it. Even now, I still use those techniques.
But you will, and I think that's important to say. DBT is not meant to fix you. DBT is about giving you the skills to cope for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Or at least start to.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things Leslie has to deal with, actually. She has got to deal with this for a long time. And
there are better ways to deal with it than harming yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, even now, I would go, right, I'm having this urge to self-harm. However, my coping mechanisms in the past have been overeating or drinking alcohol to excess or other things like shopping and spending money. And I would, if I get myself into such a state and I'm like, I really, really want to self-harm, this is going to probably sound a bit weird to people out there, but I went to myself, I am going to drink alcohol. And I was pretty bad with alcohol. And then I went, well, I don't want to keep doing this, so I'm going to choose an alcohol that I don't like. And I picked out my husband's disgusting cheap whiskey and I was swigging it out of the bottle because I just wanted to feel numb. at that point. I just needed to get out of what I was feeling. And if it was wine and stuff, I'd probably be more likely to do it again in the future. But I was in some ways punishing myself for trying to do it, to try and prevent myself from using that coping mechanism again.
I think
does that make sense?
I do.
It's difficult.
I also think that now, instead of hiding these things, after these things happen, you also tell people, you talk about it, you get the right help to support.
I told you that I got drunk on nasty whiskey.
And you told your psychologist when you saw her. And I think that is the difference, that actually, I'm
honest about...
It's like when you do say to me, and I've been with you when you wanted to get drunk, and I've said, okay, let's do it then. And you go, oh, but this is, and I don't know, once. This is one night. You're allowed to use this as your coping mechanism if it's what you need. That doesn't mean
you're going to do it every night.
Suddenly, back to where you were before, because that's not the case. And everyone gets bad days and wants to feel numb sometimes, and there's a level of understanding that you are also, you, as well as having these extra emotions that maybe some people don't feel, you also have the normal emotions that most people feel. And
then the guilt and the shame and the additional stuff on top of that. Yeah, that's the tough part.
And actually understanding that everyone has bad days and everyone feels sad sometimes.
But I guess the difference is that now I can go, I am so sad, I don't want to feel this anymore, rather than just going, I have no idea what it is I'm feeling, I just want it to all stop.
Yeah. You identify what it is, and then you go, and after you've used your coping mechanism to cope for it in that moment where you don't want to feel it because it's too much.
Yeah, I've tried everything else. It's kind of my last resort. It's not.
You then know how to, after you've done that, you can then usually get drunk, have a sleep, and then the next day you can then go back to, okay, call my psychologist, okay, tell my best friend, do those things that actually are going to help you cope with it. Whereas before the DBT, you would have got drunk and you would have got drunk and you would have got drunk and you wouldn't have done the post-drunk sorting it out mode.
There would have been none of that. And there would have just been perpetual drunkenness.
And I think that is one of the things, and I read this, and being that when you first came back from Australia and you were...
Because I had all of this treatment in Australia. I was lucky enough to be put on
You
DBT.
wanted to continue it here, and you were told it wasn't available.
Or not easily available anyway.
And definitely not on the NHS, that actually you would have to go to you privately, which is what you do. And when I was reading this, it gave me a bit of hope that, well, maybe it is out there for people that do have this and need it. And maybe we need more of it, obviously, because obviously isn't widely educated enough that everyone knows about it. But that there is actually this going on, because I do think that, I don't know what the percentage is, but there must be a percentage amount in our country of people with borderline personality disorder.
I think we talked about it on our very first episode, but I can't
which is a long time ago. I can't remember. But whatever percentage it is, there is a group of people that would best be helped through this therapy. And that therapy would mean...
To be honest, I think that even having DBT skill sessions in all schools would be beneficial to everyone, all teenagers, full stop, because it's a way to be able to understand how to relate to people. So you go through interpersonal effectiveness, like things of how to say no and things that even teenagers struggle with. Let's be honest, it's this peer pressure, or
they might, they might not be as open to it as somebody who's going through what they were, and that
I question whether some of the people that I did DBT with were open.
But it kind of gave me a glimmer of, well, maybe it is out there, because I've always thought, since you got it privately, that actually there's a lot of people out there that would not be able to afford that. So they would
particularly because it's a year-long program.
Yeah, and they would end up in the hospitals, in the psychiatric units, in the graveyards, because they haven't been able to access this help. And this help seems amazing. So it was really nice to see that in this book. Now, I don't know if it's because we said the author is American,
that she talks about DBT.
But it's talking about it in the UK.
I think she actually went through, I think Jenn Crowell had DBT herself.
But whether where she talks about it being available in the UK.
It is available in the UK. It's just
it's very rare.
Yeah, it's difficult to get into the courses. They're so hard. There's such high demand on it, and there's such long waiting lists. And unfortunately, by the time a place comes up, you've probably done something. So really,
it just needs more funding and more training and all that kind of stuff, which we just don't have in the current government.
But if you did it in schools and you talked about techniques such as Dear Man, and you probably hear me go on about Dear Man quite a lot, and I'll talk about this more in the DBT episode, but with Dear Man, you learn how to effectively communicate with someone else and express your feelings. So you start with describing the situation, you then express how you feel about that situation, you then assert what it is that you require from that interaction with that person, because usually interactions with people, there's always something that one of the parties wants, and then you give them some praise and reassurance, which is the R. So you go, we're in this situation, I feel this about it, do you mind not doing it in the future, because I would greatly appreciate it. And if you say that to someone, they go, yeah, that's just obvious. To me, it wasn't. It was not even on my radar of that's how you would interact with someone to get something that you needed.
Well, you never felt that you could ask for what you wanted. So let alone know how to ask.
Yeah.
You didn't know that you could because you felt so worthless that you didn't deserve to have your feelings validated and have people treat you differently because you deserve to be treated better. So I can understand that.
But I mean, just even something like that being taught to teenagers, I think would be a step in the right direction. You also look at emotion regulation. So that is how you deal with those emotions, such as the distracting and stuff we were talking about. And there is a final section, which is distress tolerance, which is, again, a little bit more about how you cope with distressing situations, whereas emotion regulation is what are the emotions you're feeling and how to deal with those. So, yeah, DBT, Marsha Linehan, who is also someone who has borderline personality disorder, developed it. It's a lifesaver.
Yeah, I do think so. And so I'm glad that there is people out there doing it.
And I think it's fantastic. Yeah, it's fantastic this book talks about it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, would it be on people's radars if they didn't have any knowledge of borderline personality disorder? I don't think so. But I also think that DBT can help with a whole host of different things. Yeah. Because it is looking at skills of life, really.
Yeah, and you can see the improvements in the way that Leslie deals with things, like later on when she is dealing with her baby that she has had, and she, talks to Gloria and says, I don't necessarily feel my connection to her. And Gloria goes, yeah, that's
she's not
fine.
Been with you for 6 months.
Yeah.
They've taken her away from you.
Yeah. And whereas I think that if Leslie had this child before she had her DBT, I think there would have she wouldn't have voiced her concerns and felt that she could voice her concerns and get help from them and get advice without being judged and treated differently from it, which I think when she first comes out of her child abuse situation, she is very aware that people are judging her because of it, or she feels people are judging her because of what happened. Her mother is judging her for what happened. So I do think that it's only later on when she has got that treatment that she actually is able to deal with that in a different way.
Yeah, I don't think she would have handled the situation in such a positive way unless she had DBT.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this has gone quite long, so I think we'll end it there.
Yeah.
On this particular part of Etched on Me. We'll come back next week with the second half, and we'll talk about what happens for Leslie as a result of social services getting involved with the concerns around her having a child herself. So thank you so much for listening to us. I apologise that it may have gone off on tangents at points. In some ways, I think because this book is so close to me personally, that I find there's quite a lot to talk about in this particular episode. So I hope you're getting something from it, and we will speak to you next week.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you feel that you need additional support with your mental health, please call the Samaritans on 116 123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next book will be Etched on Me by Jenn Crowell. You can find out more by visiting our website, which is mentalhealthbookclub.com. We would really love to hear what you think about this podcast. Please get in touch with us at our Facebook page, which is the Mental Health Book Club, or at our Twitter, which is at MHBC_podcast. And if you like the podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can further show your support by contributing to the Mental Health Book Club podcast at Patreon by visiting patreon.com/MHBC.